Hello, my name is Fred Valles. I'm the co-founder and CEO at Optimizer. I'm also the host for Automation Layering Masterclass, the class that teaches you how to get better results from modern PPC management. Now, one of the problems in modern PPC management is that a lot depends on automations provided by the ad engines like Google. There's a lot of machine learning and a lot of artificial intelligence that does things to these campaigns. But what we have historically seen is that if you add humans to the mix, they can actually make the machines do better. And that makes sense because you, as the human, you already know things about your client, you know things about the business. If you could just inform the machines about those things and not let them be all generic, you'd actually get better results. But then the question becomes, is this going to be tedious? Is this going to be time consuming for me as a human to oversee these massively complicated systems from Google that do all this sophisticated AI and machine learning? Well, the good news is it doesn't have to be. And that's what automation layering is all about. It's about taking your human strategies and having your own set of tools and tactics to make sure that those AI systems from the ad engines are working towards your goals. And one of the best examples of this is what we're going to share today. Will and Taylor from WebMechanix used value-based bidding to drive better quality results for one of their clients. Today, they will share with us how they did that, what problems they were facing, and hopefully you will learn how you can deploy value-based bidding and automation layering for your advertising campaigns. So with that, let's go and meet our guests for today. Will and Taylor, welcome to the show. Thank you for being part of our first Automation Layering Masterclass.
Of course. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, glad to be here.
All right. So, Taylor, you're in the middle there. So let's start with you. Tell us a little bit about what you do.
Yeah, so I've worn a few hats here, but found my stride at WebMechanix doing paid search and paid social. For these purposes, I sort of have transitioned into working with teams and sort of helping strategy with those specific channels. But yeah, working alongside Will is one of them.
Great. And then that tees up Will very nicely. Will, what do you do?
Yeah, so I'm a paid search director here at WebMechanix. I focus a lot on our high spending paid search accounts, directly managing a lot of those, and then working across teams to help improve the performance on paid search where we might be kind of missing the mark at the moment, and then helping them get to where we need them to go.
Yeah, that's always the big thing, right? We're getting them where they need to go, and it's never the same because PPC keeps evolving so quickly. So, you've worked with a client, and obviously there was a problem. They came to you for a reason. Can you explain a little bit what they were facing, what issues they were having?
Yeah, so my client in particular, they are in the addiction space. And so the name of their game is really lead volume. So we were facing this challenge where we were generating leads, but they sort of, quality was an issue. They found that they prioritized calls over form fills just as it was easier to keep people on the phones and continue that process to getting them into treatment versus forms where they had much lower close rates. So sort of the challenge where they were at is they didn't necessarily want to say, let's deprioritize forms, make that a secondary action. They wanted to continue to have both running, but give that priority to if a user is going to prioritize those phone calls, essentially was their challenge that they posed to us is we want better quality, more calls, but not necessarily getting rid of forms.
Right. So kind of the problem that when you run Google Ads, you're basically going after conversions and a cost per acquisition model or a return on ad spend model. But the problem is that a lot of advertisers don't exactly quantify those conversions the right way. And so you could get lots of cheap conversions, but they might be really low quality. And quote unquote conversion is someone who fills out the form, but nobody cares about form fills, right? We all care about who ends up paying at the end of the process. And it sounds like this is what it was about. So the calls were more likely to lead to that end stage of a conversion. And that's what they wanted to get more of then. Is that right?
Yep, that's exactly right. Yeah, calls, they had a much higher success rate with closing. So really just trying to jack up the amount of calls that we were getting from our campaigns.
And then you kind of like alluded to something that's already a little bit more complicated here, but primary and secondary conversion action. Will, do you want to, maybe we'll bring you into the conversation here and tell us a little bit about what that's all about.
Yeah, so the primary conversion actions are essentially what your campaigns are going to be optimizing towards. So in your conversion tab, if you go under the settings and then look in your conversions, you can see some listed as primary or secondary. Secondary essentially means that they're still being counted in your side of your account, but your conversions, they're not being counted in your conversion column. So we're not actually optimizing towards those secondary ones. It is useful to still have some of that stuff in there just so you can look at your all conversions and see, what secondary conversions are still converting. So let's say like we are optimizing towards form fills, but we're posting back data and we just don't have enough of it to set that as a primary conversion action, whether that be MQ or SQL. We still want to track the quality of our leads, but we won't want to actually start optimizing towards that lower funnel conversion action. So we can set that as secondary and then still see like, okay, this campaign had 50 form fills, but only like 2 MQLs. Maybe we need to adjust something on the front end, whether that be keyword search terms, location targeting or something like that to start driving more MQLs from those leads that we're actually driving.
Right. And that seems like a pretty common scenario in high value lead gen. Like the space that this client is working in is you get a fairly low volume of actual deals closed on a monthly basis. And then that's the game in PPC, right? Is when do we have enough volume to give something to the machine learning system from Google, yep, which manages the bids for you? Because if you give them 2 conversions per month, well, it's not going to learn very fast. It's not going to have a lot of data to steer the ship. So it's really not going to be optimizing that much. So how do you get to a place where you have enough conversions, say like maybe 30 a month, so that you can actually make decisions, but then also tie that back to what you ultimately care about. So that's kind of the name of the game. And in the past, I've heard people talk about micro and macro conversions. Nowadays, we're talking about primary and secondary conversion actions. Mm-hmm. And before that, I think in the Google system, it was called quote unquote include in conversions was what that setting was called. But so very interesting how you're using that primary conversion action to drive the machine. And by the way, Will, this question for you, but you said this helps decide what optimizations to do. We're talking about bidding, I think, smart bidding, but are we talking about more than that in terms of like, what are we deciding based on primary conversion actions?
Yeah, so I still think it's like useful to have in there. Let's say like you have a keyword that's driving a ton of conversions or something like that. And over the last like let's 30 days, 60 days, it's driven like 100 conversions and like no actual MQLs. Even though like the volume's still low, that can still be a good signal for us. Like, okay, this is driving a ton of conversions, no MQLs. Maybe we should pause this and spend money elsewhere where we have room to grow, where we've actually gotten a few MQLs, even though it's lower volume. It can still point us in the right direction.
Right. So some budget decisions, it sounds like, could be based on this. If you have a limited budget, you allocate primarily to where most of the MQLs are coming.
Yeah, I think budget, landing page, ads, really anything that you can test. Like, I don't see why you can't use this data to at least point you or as a guiding light to the right decision. Like, yes, we might not have the volume to actually optimize towards it in our bid strategies, but it can give us a sense of what is currently working in the account and what's not currently working to help us grow revenue.
Yeah. And Taylor, what was the outcome of doing some of these VBB-based strategies for that client?
Yeah, so essentially we set calls at a value of like, I think it was 1,000, and then we had form set as a value for 100. So it's sort of like a 10-to-1 ratio between the two, really trying to prioritize those calls. And the outcome was great. So we had this running on a 4-month basis to sort of see the growth and make sure we had enough data to see the impact. We did see the ratio of calls to form fills move from pre-value-based bidding. It was about like 42% percent calls, 57%, 58% forms. Post value-based bidding, we saw our calls were up to 70%, 30% of our leads were coming from forms. So really sort of shifted that ratio to where we were successful and able to see those calls being that primary driver of those leads. Also, overall, we did see a slight increase in our conversions, which was nice outside of those optimizations. But yeah, really saw the ratio shift to 70% coming from
So
calls.
you saw the client getting more of the type of conversion they thought was higher value that would eventually lead to MQLs.
Yep, exactly. And you know, while we were really happy to be able to sort of like meet the baseline here of great, like we were able to get more calls coming through, we did see that trickle down as well as far as like their sort of down funnel metrics are concerned. So over time, while we were getting like we basically saw that we were increasing our value or VOB completes, which essentially are like their MQLs, if you will. So essentially, you know, we were not only seeing in platform, we were meeting like calls, the goal that we had set there, but it was trickling down funnel, all just because of that shift there. So it's really successful, sort of twofold, and it's still a strategy that's working really well in that account.
So let's boil that down, right? So because I think you also explained what was the solution, how did you fix this problem and get to these great results that you wanted? But VBB is basically about, if you're in lead gen, rather than saying we have a straight up cost per acquisition goal, maybe shifting it more to a ROAS goal and starting to define different values for what used to be a singular conversion. And so I think you kind of went there and you said, well, for calls, we're going to put $1,000 conversion value, whereas for the form fills, we're going to put $100 conversion value. Now, how did you pick these numbers, and did these numbers eventually change, or was it, did it just work off the bat?
I wish it just worked off the bat. No, it definitely was iterative. So in the beginning, it was, you know, we started gradually because I also wanted to be mindful where we didn't just completely throttle because like lead volume overall, we didn't want to see a huge drop. So we wanted it to sort of be gradual changes to start to see the shifts truly play out. I started with forms being at like $100, and I think calls I set to like $250, like a smaller split. Didn't necessarily see a shift happening after 1 month, shifted that again, moving into the next month up to 500. And then by month 4, when I started to see that trend going up, I'd moved over to 1,000. And so that's sort of, it was like over time waiting to see that happens. I know it's sort of like that wait and see game where I don't want to make too many changes to that bid strategy, but also want to start to amp it up as I started to see the results coming through. So yeah, definitely was sort of iterative over time as we started to see it either not work enough in the beginning, but then as we started to see that success and sort of lead volume not drop off with that change, felt more comfortable laying on the pedal a little bit more.
Yeah, I think this client specifically was like a pretty unique situation because typically like these days when we're talking about value-based bidding, we're talking about posting data back from like a CRM and then optimizing towards a lower level funnel action that's happening within the CRM. So whether that be like MQL, SQL, or eventually sale, this was, hey, we need to tell Google which conversion action we want to prioritize. So we can't get rid of these conversion actions because the client still felt like they're important. But we want to tell Google with TROAS what action we want our users to be taking, go out and find more users that are going to take that action. So in this case, it was calls. So it's kind of just fiddling around with the conversion volumes. Like, where's the limit where we can start getting more calls? And I guess $1,000 was that limit, and then 100 for the form fills.
Yeah, they're such a unique case because I'd like to say that there was some like magic behind choosing those numbers, but truly it was just a matter of like there being enough of a distinction between, if we're in Google's eyes, essentially, of showing what that difference in value between the two was. And ultimately, like it did take time to see that return on ad spend in the initial, like I started it in batches for a number of campaigns as well, just because I knew that there was going to be a bit of a lag, if you will, for it to be able to spend, because we also had sort of spend thresholds that we needed to hit as well. So there's like all these competing sort of priorities, if you will. But yeah, started with a number of campaigns as well, knowing that it had to take a bit of time to not only learn this new bid strategy, but also find those high value, the right people to match those conversion actions that were that higher value. And definitely was a bit of an iteration over time, a bit of a slower roll. But again, it eventually found its stride and was able to work out.
Yeah, and I think now these days it's a little bit easier to do with the conversion value-based rules. And then also now we know, like, this was implemented a long time ago, but now we know is like, okay, we could look at that front-end conversion action, track it down to MQL, SQL, and then sale, and then back out the values based off the percentages of conversions between each step. And that would give us our starting values, and then we could adjust from there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. A lot there to unpack, I think. So first of all, going back a little bit, right? So you shifted from a TCPA strategy to a TROAS strategy. And this is important because that's one of the fundamentals of VBB. So that's the first change you make. And then rather than manipulating the ROAS target, what your levers actually became the value that you reported for different types of conversions. Now, unpacking what Will was saying. So typically what this means is going into a CRM system and figuring out, okay, at what stage of MQL, SQL are you, or the deal is closed, and how do we report that back to Google? But the challenge that a lot of advertisers face is it takes 6 months to close the deal. And after 6 months, you can't restate this to Google. And by the way, even if this happens in 30 days, Google's machine learning system prefers learning very quickly. So if you can feed something back within like 24 hours of the click happening that, hey, this is a high probability of leading to the thing we want, the machine learning system can more quickly adjust and adapt its bidding to get you more of that. So let's talk about that, and then let's go to conversion value rules. But Will, do you want to talk a little bit more about, like, typically in a CRM system and connecting that back to Google? What should someone do, and what have you done for your clients?
Yeah, so I mean, the first thing is we either need to have enhanced conversion set up, or we need to be posting the G-CLID through to the CRM and down to the milestones that we want to be tracking inside of Google Ads. So that's the very first thing that we need to have in place. And then secondly, personally, I like to use dynamic values for each one of my conversions. So I'm not using a set conversion value anytime somebody converts. And the reason is because we know, like, every MQL, every SQL, or every sale is not going to be the same value, right? So to get a better understanding of the actual ROAS that we're driving from our campaigns, I don't think it's necessary, like a needs to have. Like, you can back out of like an average value based off of your conversion rates to each step and your average sales cost, right? But it does give you more accurate data. I know you had mentioned time to conversion. That's also something to consider, because, like you said, we work with a lot of B2B lead gen clients, and that sale's not happening in a 90-day window. So depending on the rate that you're moving each user down to each step, that's going to limit what you're actually going to be able to optimize to. Like, if that SQL happens out of that 90-day window, we're not going to be able to use that as our main conversion action. We're probably going to have to move up to like an MQL or something like that. So it's really like, do we have the G-CLID posting back or into the CRM? Does the actual next step actually happen within the time frame that we can optimize towards? The other thing to consider too, especially when moving from like a max conversion is to or TCPA to TROAS, is the amount of conversion volume you have. Because when you're using TROAS, Google has to figure out how likely is this user going to convert, and then also what is the value going to be from that conversion. So having more conversion volume is always going to be better, especially when you're comparing like TCPA and TROAS. Typically, they like to see 45 conversions over a 30-day window before we switch from one of those bid strategies to TROAS one. And that's dependent on whatever conversion action you're bidding towards and what level you're setting that bid strategy at.
And talk about the levels of setting the bid strategy. What do you mean by that?
So I'm mainly saying whether we're setting it at like an account level through our portfolio or whether we're setting it at the campaign level. And then you could go farther down to the ad group level as well too.
Right. So portfolio bid strategies. Now there's also the question of the conversion event itself that can be set at the MCC account or campaign level. Do you have an opinion on what works best there?
I don't really have an opinion. It just depends on like what you
It
need
always
for
depends. That's the
specific.
right answer in PPC.
Yeah. It just depends on what you need for a specific campaign. Um, I mean, if you're including all of your actions as primary conversion actions at the account level, like let's just say you go in and you set every single conversion action as primary within your conversion settings. And we know we want to be bidding towards a specific one in a specific campaign. Like let's say like you have one campaign that gets like 50 lead fill or form fills, and then it doesn't get as many MQLs or enough that we need to use to bid towards MQL in that campaign, then I would probably just change that or whatever high converting campaigns at the MQL level, those campaigns to like, all right, MQL is my specific primary conversion action for this campaign.
So Taylor, tell us a little bit about what that looks like when you have different conversion actions set up in Google.
Sure. So for these guys, what we decided to do is for our call extensions, you can see we have this value set here through the settings. So you can just set it here at this level. We decided to go over time gradually up to this $1,500 mark. But so you can see we're at $1,500 for phone calls. This client in particular uses call tracking metrics. So we were just using that as our source here. But so we have value set for those calls here. And then looking at the landing page, we have that value set at $100. So we've gradually worked up to that $1,500 mark. But again, those are how those two are set up. Both are set up as those primary actions, though. It's really just using that value to sort of differentiate between the calls being preferred over the forms.
That makes sense. And I noticed here that there's a last click attribution model. Is that something you've experimented with, or how do you think about attribution?
Yeah, so this client in particular is last click. However, they're just similar to a lot of other clients. There's also that ongoing conversation of like assisted conversions and things like that, which we talk through, but most of our success in reporting is on a last click basis for these guys, just as that's sort of how they look at that last conversion point is going to be most important to them, that push that person over the edge. Also knowing that, this industry is a little bit finicky where people it's very common that people have multiple touch points. So it's sort of like someone could come through 3 times and be ready for treatment. So that's where it's kind of like, let's see where they actually ended at. Haven't toyed too much around with that.
And so when it comes to reporting back to the clients and the results that you saw from this particular campaign, tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So in looking at the data that we reported back to them, we did see an overall improvement in the call conversions that were coming through. We saw about a 64% increase in our 4-month period compared to the sort of like test period, if you will. Also looking further down the funnel. So this is sort of like how we presented it to the client. And after like looking through their CRM, taking a look at what's happening down funnel, you can see there's a few acronyms here. They have VOB complete, VOB approved, and then admission. You can sort of think of these as like VOB completes is sort of like a quality lead. VOB approved is sort of like a MQL, and there's closed as the admission. But over time, you can see while our VOB completes or qualified leads didn't necessarily go up, the quality of those leads over time did. So we were seeing, while less leads were generated, the quality of them was higher given that. So we sort of like made some assumptions there with the correlation between calls improving and then the quality of those leads improving, sort of made some hypotheses and with the client to say, cool, looking down funnel and seeing like where these leads were coming from, the status of those call leads were, being marked as VOB approved, and sort of like connecting the dots in that sense through their CRM to sort of validate that what we were seeing in platform was trickling through down funnel.
Exactly. So go back to the first slide you showed with the table. So that was basically the shift that you caused in platform on Google Ads, shift towards more calls. And then the second set of graphs you showed was basically validating that from a business perspective, they were seeing what you guys were doing in Google Ads correlating to better performance for the bottom line, I guess.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Because we kind of approached it from a way where, I didn't want to go to them and just continuously say like, hey, look, we generated more calls, and they weren't really seeing the value down funnel. So that was where we always try and stick as close as possible to what's actually happening in platform.
Right. And I suppose it's also tricky because in VBB, I mean, honestly, if you do it right, your cost per acquisition is going to get more expensive because you're going to buy better leads, which are more competitive because other advertisers are probably doing the same thing, right? You want to spend more on the lead that's actually going to convert.
Yep.
And so to a client who doesn't have that right mindset, that can be very jarring and concerning. And, now they fire your agency because they're like, oh, this is wrong, but look at the bottom line, right?
And this takes a lot of communication up front with the client before you even decide to switch over to a value-based bidding approach. Is like, hey, we might see overall volume come down for like leads or form fills, but that's not really the goal of this. The goal of this is to improve lead quality that will translate into more revenue. Likely the conversions that we're now missing out on weren't going to turn into sales for you anyways. So let's bid more for the users who are actually going to result in revenue for your company.
For sure. Yeah. And expectation setting with this client in particular was huge. They were very involved in, we try to involve them in the strategy portion of it, letting them know, hey, lead volume is going to be down in the beginning, but exactly like Will said, this is what our goal is. And, keeping them very close to it. The benefit for these guys is that their sales cycles are maybe 30 days. It can be a lot quicker than that. So we were able to really act on and sort of like get as close as possible to what's happening down funnel and act upon that and see if it was working quicker than some other B2B clients where it could take up to an entire quarter to see if someone even moves to become an MQL or something like that. So yeah, expectation setting is huge, and letting them know this is going to be a shift in lead volume. Cost per click or cost per lead is going to go up. However, keeping a close eye on that quality is going to be huge.
There's just a change in the reporting, really. It's like we're not reporting form fills anymore. We're reporting on these down funnel metrics, whether that be MQL, SQL, and then eventually revenue. And whatever conversion action we're bidding to, that's what we want to see increasing over time and improving the efficiency there, and then ultimately resulting in more revenue.
Yeah. And that's where this chart really was helpful in demonstrating to them, because you can look at the numbers straight up and say, you can see the blue line going down over time, but that's where this secondary chart here to really show what that approval rating, the percentage of our leads that were approved over time was critical to be able to sort of show that other view of the number itself is not what's important. It's the quality of that lead that we wanted to really showcase here.
So let's talk a little bit about automation layering specifically now, right? So we get the concept of VBB, drove great results. We had all these levers that we pulled, and many of them were manual. But Will, you talked about conversion value rules as a great tool to sort of bring smart bidding together with automating your values that you're reporting. So that's a perfect example of automation layering. So tell us a little bit about what these conversion value rules are and how you use them.
Yeah, so with the conversion value rules, it just gives me more control on the front end. So if I were to go and look at like specific device type or specific geos or something like that, and I can see that we're driving a ton more value from those specific examples, I can go in and set a conversion value rule that's like, hey, anybody for this device type, we're going to adjust the conversion value rule. So either increase or decrease by a certain percentage. So when they come in and they go to like an MQL from that specific device type or whatever, we're actually adjusting that conversion value. So either increasing or decreasing it.
Right. And so we have some tools in Optimizer that support building these rules and basically helping you figure out what the rules should be in the first place. And so the way that we think about it is we'll show you, okay, you can do the value adjustment based on geo, device, or audience. So based on geo, we can actually show you had this many clicks coming from India and this many clicks coming from the United States and this many from California and New York. And then we ask you to do kind of like a subjective evaluation of that. So do you think that a lead that came from California is better than average, worse than average, or just average? And so you keep doing that for a whole bunch of geographies. And then we start to build rules that say, okay, well, if you say that California is slightly better, right? And think again back to it's just a form fill. You don't know anything besides they filled out the same form, but they came from one place or another place. Which one's more valuable? And so we make small increments on what you think is better than average. Teeny tiny, like 5% increase. And so that kind of steers the system from Google in the right direction. And you keep iterating and doing this again and again. And eventually you get to this, like, yeah, California, we're bidding far higher because we're not actually bidding higher, right? It's the automated bidding that's bidding higher because you've told it that conversion from California is 5%, 10%, 20% more valuable. So all things being equal, bidding for a click from New York versus California, it says, oh, the one from California more likely to drive value. So therefore, I'm going to buy that click, right? So that's how we think about conversion value rules. Were there any other tools, that made your life easier, Will, as you were sort of implementing these campaigns and these strategies?
I think with value-based bidding, the goal is obviously to increase like revenue and then quality of leads and not have to set the bids yourself manually. So whenever I don't have to do that, that's already a huge win for me. I think in a lot of cases, I was probably adding a lot of broad match in here as well too. Typically, I've seen if you have enough data and you're using a smart bidding strategy and you already have a negative list built out, that's pretty robust. Broad match works pretty well, and the CPCs are a little bit cheaper than on phrase and exact match. So a lot of tools that have helped have been Optimizer's negative keyword finder, so using that pretty often, and then using a script to kind of monitor the search terms report. So just pulling search terms report and seeing if there's a spike in a specific search term.
Yeah. So as you trust automation to do more things for you, putting a few monitoring and alerting systems in place to make sure, basically PPC insurance, that the system's not going crazy.
Yeah, and I have seen that happen with broad match in specific industries, especially in a lot of the B2B lead gen SaaS focused industries. It just doesn't seem to determine the difference between, like, let's say you're bidding on a lot of acronyms. They don't really get the contextual singles there quite as well as like if you're just bidding on like something a little bit easier, maybe like an e-com account or something like that.
And when these clicks are so expensive, it really adds up when the machine is using your money to learn over a number of weeks that, oh yeah, that actually was not a great search term to show the ad for.
Yeah, I mean, we have clients where the cost per click is up around $20. So yeah, anytime you're getting those ads clicked and it's not resulting in a conversion there, it can be pretty frustrating.
Yeah, this client, their CPCs are around like $30. So that was also a learning in switching over to this value-based bidding as we leaned more onto just like broad match. And that was a lot more time spent going through that search term report, just as it was pulling in so many other things. And while more time was spent in sort of like sculpting that traffic, it did ultimately work out. But it was, tools like Optimizer do make it a lot easier to go through and take some of that manual looking through like all of your search terms, and yeah, starting to sculpt the way a little bit better. Because that's the other thing too, is like this bid strategy, we were testing it with phrase and exact, but it was just we weren't getting the volume that we needed to support it. So that was also, again, it's sort of like the cost benefit of more time needing to spend going through and add negatives, but worked out in the end.
Great. Hey, well, Will and Taylor, thank you so much for teaching our viewers and our listeners a little bit about how you do VBB and how that fits into automation layering and getting your clients and your advertisers the best results possible. If you've enjoyed this episode, subscribe at the link below. We'll be back with more episodes of Automation Layering Masterclass. Take care.